So I'd like to continue to talk about the practice and what it means to be a yogi. Meditators are often called yogis, and if we look at what this word means, if we look at the origins of the word, we can understand what we're doing here more clearly. The word derives from a Pali phrase, and I'll just say it, but to understand the meaning is what is important. It derives from the phrase Bhavanaya Yota Payotatayati Yogi. And what that means is that a person who possesses effort to be engaged in mental development is called a yogi. And this effort is not just ordinary effort, but it has 3 levels that we develop as we go through the practice. So this 3-level effort is also called courageous effort. It's the effort that we make when we do something, no matter what the cost is. We can do it at the risk of our life and limb. And we don't possess this type of effort initially in the practice, but we develop that type of attitude as we continue. So this is the meaning of the word yogi, a person who possesses this type of effort, the 3-leveled effort in mental development, which is called bhavana. And so this word in the phrase bhavanaya yota payotatayati yogi, the objective we have here is developing the mind. So it's good to know what the objective is also of someone who's called a yogi. And what are the benefits that we can get from doing this as we recite each evening, Ekaya no yan bhikkhave mago sadanang visuddhiya soka paridevanang samatikamaya dukkha domanatsanam atengamaya nyayasa adigamaya nibbanasa sachikiriyaya yadidang chattaro satipatthana. The Buddha said at the very beginning of the Mahasatipatthana Sutta that describes this practice, he said that there are 7 benefits that we get from it. The first of these is purity of mind. Although it says, for the purity of beings, what needs to be purified is the mind. It's not really possible to, although we can make ourselves more healthy perhaps, when the Buddha said satanang visuddhiya, he meant purification of the minds of beings. So this is the first benefit that we can get. And even if this were the only benefit that we got from the practice, it would still be very good. And further, we can get the benefit of overcoming sorrow and lamentation. Overcoming physical pain and mental distress are the 2nd and 3rd benefits. And the 4th and the 5th are the ending of sorrow and lamentation. Sorrow is the sadness that we feel, and lamentation is when we can't stop from crying. So we feel sorrow, and as a result, we cry. And then we can gain the noble path and realize Nibbana. We can't get benefits like this for nothing. So the price we have to pay is to come to possess these 3 levels of effort. the initial effort to begin the practice, and increased effort to overcome obstacles in the practice. And once the obstacles have been overcome, to make effort that progresses continuously until reaching the end of the goal, the end of the practice, which is realization of Nibbana. So initial effort. Initially, we have to make the effort to begin the practice. That involves, for example, in this case, we're not online. Some people may be online, but those of you who are here at this center, you've made the effort to come to this center to undertake the retreat. And we listen to the instructions and apply them. So this is the initial effort that we're already engaged in. The instructions that we follow for us to follow the instructions, apply them. It's like taking medicine that's been prescribed for an illness that we've gone to a doctor to see. If we take the medicine as prescribed, then we can get better. And if we don't take the medicine as prescribed, then we might not get well. So we make the initial effort to come to the retreat. We take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. We take moral precepts, and we listen to the instructions and apply them. During this sitting, we start out by placing the attention on the abdomen, because that is where the rising movement and falling movement happens, which we take as our object, as our main object, like an anchor for us. So we exert energy so that the mind gets to that area, so the mind gets to the rising movement, to the rising falling, so that it can observe it from the beginning to the end every time that it occurs. And in walking, we make the effort to direct the mind, placing it on the leg, the lower leg or the foot, so that we can observe each step, so that we can observe each lifting and placing, each lifting, moving and placing, every standing at the ends of the path and turning. So this effort is a driving force that gets the mind to the object of observation. And in addition, there are other objects that take our attention away during this sitting, and we make an effort to note those and then to return again to the primary object after they go. So effort springs naturally from having the confidence or the conviction that this practice will bring benefit. And having this type of faith, confidence, or conviction in the benefit that we can gain leads to a desire to get those benefits. An analogy for that feeling of conviction is how we might feel if we select a good seed to plant and we plant it in a place that's appropriate. We feel confident that this seed is going to grow into the plant that we chose. And in the same way, we should have confidence that this seed of practice that we're planting will develop. For people who are born Buddhist, it may be easy for them to have faith in things like the Buddha or the Dhamma or the Sangha. And in our culture, we may not be used to this, but we should at least have confidence that the practice that we are doing leads to benefit and a desire to get those benefits. If we have that, we'll be willing to try. After we plant a seed, we have to tend to the seed. For example, when the sapling, the little plant sprouts, we need to put a fence around it. We need to water the plant as necessary, not too much and not too little. We need to work the soil so that the roots can move freely. And then we have to remove harmful insects that may damage the plant. In doing the practice, we also need to tend to our plant, so to speak, by getting instructions and following them, by listening to Dhamma talks and talking about the practice with our teachers. And we keep the seed alive until we can get the benefits of developing the mind, developing knowledge, and realizing the peace of Nibbana. The fence that we put around our plant of practice is essentially the morality that we keep. Because without it, our practice won't develop. And we can also include in the fencing the observance of the practice schedule. It's a support to the practice. So we should try our best to do it. And if you have a problem with it, when you meet with me, either today or tomorrow, you can discuss it, or else you can speak with Laura. Because this way of practice, even though I know people may be tired from trips, and I certainly am tired from my trip, and I probably won't make it to the last sitting tonight. It's just maybe not possible. But try to do your best. And if you have to sit in a chair, if you can't maintain your posture in the hall, sitting on the cushion. Sometimes I do that when I'm too sleepy to sit on a bench like this. I sit in a chair and at least I can stay awake most of the time. And I'd like to add to that, this schedule is sitting 1 hour and walking 1 hour, which is a very, very good way to develop concentration and effort, which are two factors that need to be developed in tandem to develop mindfulness and knowledge. And we also have to water the plant. And this is an analogy for listening to the Dhamma talks. So when you listen to the Dhamma talks, you don't need to note the hearing process per se. Just try to absorb the content. And you can take notes if you want to or not. If you hear things that you find useful, then I'm glad. And if you hear things that you don't find useful, you don't need to, just don't be bothered by them. If you have questions, then you can ask. You can either write a note or you can let me know in an interview. Then we have to work the soil so that the roots can develop, so that the plant can develop. And this is done by speaking about your experience with the teacher to get guidance and to get feedback. And we'll begin to do this starting with tomorrow. So it's quite simple. It's not complicated to describe your experience, because there are only 3 things that the teacher wants to know. What was it that arose? What was the object? The rising or the falling, hearing. What was the object? Second thing is noting it. Did you note it? Or did you not note it? Just either one, whichever is true, you say. And if you noted it, or if you took note that object happened, then what did you notice about it? If you didn't note the object, what was it that happened that took your attention? The first thing, what arises, just happens on its own. we don't have to do anything to make things happen. For example, the rising, the falling, it just happens on its own. And then taking note of it, we apply the mind to the object, and we keep it there, sustain it on the object until the object goes away. So to note the rising from the beginning to the end involves aiming the mind, applying the mind to the object, and keeping it there. And then, when you note it, what do you notice about it? Did you note some characteristic or quality? For example, a pain arose. I noted it. It was stabbing. A stabbing pain. That's what I mean by, what did you notice about it? Or it was hard, or it was aching, or it was however it was. And then there are 3 sections to our day. So the teacher wants to hear about the sitting practice, the walking practice, and general activities. But in the interview, I may ask you to report about walking and general activities. I may not. But definitely the sitting is going to be the first section to speak about. And we sit many hours a day. And so first of all, at the beginning of your report, please just say how many hours you sat and how many hours you walked. And if you follow the schedule, it'll be some number, whatever that is. In Burma, it's usually 7 and 7, 7 sitting, 7 walking. But, whatever it is, just keep a note of how many hours you sit and how many hours you walk, how many times and how long each one is, just for this day, before you report. And this isn't because I'm trying to be a policewoman. It's because it gives valuable information because the concentration develops certain factors and the walking develops certain factors. So, for example, sometimes there have been yogis who sit for like 10 hours a day and walk for 2 or 3. And sometimes it means that sometimes they may be able to do that, but often there's something out of balance that they need to balance. And when you know how much they're sitting and how much they're walking, then you can make that assessment more accurately. So we have many sittings that we do throughout the day. Just select whichever one is the best, or whichever one you want to talk about. The best, or the one you think of as the best, or something that is typical, or your longest and strongest, if you're sitting for more than an hour, and from within the last 24 hours. And also don't feel like you're lying if you choose the best one, because the practice has ups and downs throughout the day. From the sitting, you should always speak about the primary object. And one of the sayadaws told me, your teachers never get tired of hearing about your primary object. Don't think you're boring them by talking about rising and falling. You can talk the whole interview about rising and falling, and they won't get bored, because it's very important. So that means, for example, about a rising that you happen to know. The rising happened. That's number 1, the object that arose. I noted it. That's number 2. And number 3, what did I notice about it? What was it like? How did it feel? And then what happened after that? So that's just an example. And then the second thing to report about is thinking. I was lost. A thought arose, but I didn't notice it. Seemed like a long time before I noticed it. I noted it, and it was gone immediately. Is an example of what you might say. So just report about thinking. The third thing is report about the mind wandering. That means the mind has left the primary object, but it's not necessarily thinking. It's just going away somewhere. The fourth thing to speak about is pain. And some people don't experience any physical pain in their practice. And if that's the case, you can report about some strong sensation, like stiffness or hardness or whatever. And then the fifth category is, other objects. For example, a type of emotion that comes up is typically happening, or sights that appear in your mind, or sounds. Or sometimes we have tastes. There are all sorts of things that could be in this other category. So you don't have to report every single thing that happens in the sitting, but these are 5 categories that you should just look at the sitting and see, okay, what am I going to say about primary object? What about thinking? What happened with thinking? What happened? Was there wandering? Sometimes you might not have noticed wandering, but there might have been thinking. So for the sitting that you report on, just say how long that sitting was, and also to say briefly about walking. If you report about the walking, you should say pick your best walking period and say how long it was. In general, you should report about a walking period that is at least 45 minutes. And then just describe how the lifting was. If you're doing whatever, you should just describe how you spend the walking period. I spent the first half of the walking period observing lifting, left step and right step, and the second part observing lifting and placing, or however you spent the hour or length of time that it was. You should say how you practiced. The method is of observing one part, one step, one part, and then 2 parts, and if you observe 3 parts also. And then in that, you describe, for example, if you are observing lifting and placing as the most refined, then you would say the lifting was, I noted the lifting, it was however it was. I felt lightness or whatever you felt. And when I placed the foot, I noted placing, and I noticed whatever you noticed about it. And then standing at the end of the path and turning, how you noted those and what you noticed. If you need to make a few notes about your sitting or about your walking, it's okay to do it, but not in the hall. So sometimes you may feel that you need to make a few notes, and it is all right to do that, but it's not necessary. You'll probably remember what stands out in your mind, what's important. And so don't be worried about it. So then, that is describing working the soil of our plant of practice. And then we have to remove harmful insects. Is the last thing we need to do. And this involves increasing the effort from the initial stage so that we can overcome obstacles, and from there to increase further so that it continues to progress gradually, going up and up until we realize the goal of the practice. So what sort of obstacles come up in the practice? In sitting, we have the instruction to note every object that arises as and when it arises from the beginning to the end, starting with the rising and falling movement of the abdomen. And in walking, to observe every step, every lifting and placing, or lifting, moving, and placing. So we start out to do this, but sometimes what happens is we don't see the results of our practice yet, and we start to feel bored and sluggish. And this boredom can lead to being sleepy. It can lead to sloth and torpor. And this sleepiness or sloth and torpor is the nearest enemy of the yogi. And another way that sluggishness or boredom can manifest is not wanting to practice, not wanting to do it at all, or undertaking it but not doing so energetically. So I haven't mentioned any methods. There are methods to overcome sleepiness. So that's going to be coming up in a near talk. I said that, you can sit in a chair, and this is true. It's better to just sit in a chair than to go to your room and sleep if that's what you feel you need to do. But I will say a few words about methods to overcome sleepiness. If you feel sluggish or sleepy, the first thing to do is to try to pay more attention. Because when you try to pay attention more, when you focus more, it kind of livens up the mind. But if you don't feel, I would say, there's really so much that I have to say that we don't have time to say in the next 5 minutes. So, but just know that, for example, you can twist your ear. If you feel bored, you can move to twist your ear like this, because that will bring blood to the head, and it will make you feel a little more alive. That's the first method the Buddha taught for overcoming sleepiness. So when you know that the mind is dull or sleepy, the first thing to do is just note that mind. Oh, dull, or sleepy. With the noting, with the application of the observing mind to note the dullness, sometimes that's enough to dispel the sleepiness. When the sleepy mind goes away, you may feel the body being heavy. So you note it. If you feel the body is heavy, or if it's nodding, you try to note it. The act of focusing the mind on the object like that is a way of waking the mind up. You should remember that we have to observe things many, many times, even billions of times, before the mind starts to develop really noticeable energy. And what's involved in our observation is the effort to observe, and then the aiming of the mind so that it gets to the object right at the beginning. Because that's what we need to try to do, is get the object, get the rising, get the falling at the very beginning. When we get it at the beginning, we'll be able to keep the mind there. It will get very interesting because when the mind can stay with it from beginning to end, then the mind really connects with the object, and you start to see more and more about it, and it makes the practice very interesting. So just know that part of what we do is making the effort to observe, that driving force, and then aiming the mind so that we get there at the beginning of the object. And I have to just include also another obstacle for us in the initial stage of the practice is pain. physical pain, and unbearable sensations. So these two, at the initial stage, we just don't have the courage to face them sometimes. So, because we're not used to having to just sit still and observe what happens in our body. But just one thing to remember about pain is that it is not our enemy. So we have to we didn't ask it to come, we didn't make it come, and we cannot make it go away, by wishing it away or by noting it. So we just have to observe how it is. Does it get worse? Probably. But when our concentration is strong enough, you will be able to conquer it. The pain will reduce and go away. So just remember that it's a matter of the concentration. When the concentration starts to develop a little, then we start to feel pain. And until our concentration gets strong enough, that pain can be very strong. You can move your posture. I will talk about ways to work with pain, but you can mindfully change your posture to even stand up if you need to for a few minutes and observe the standing posture, which is what I used to do too. So just remember so these are two examples, the sleepiness and boredom and pain. They require us to increase our effort. And with increased effort, we can get past these problems. But increased effort is not all we need, because that just gets us to a smooth level. But we still need to develop the effort that progresses further and further throughout the stages of insight into Nibbana. And it happens naturally with our making effort to observe. So that is all I would like to say for today. Thank you for listening.